A man with ALS sat down in his own living room, in his own chair, and used a brain implant to write 183,000 sentences. Not in a lab, not with a research team hovering over him. At home, over 19 months. More than 3,800 hours of use. He answered email. He browsed the web. He kept his job. Now, when I first read that, I had the same reaction you probably just had. Something like, the mind has escaped the body. The ghost finally got out of the machine. And then a question landed on me that I have not been able to put down since. Escaped into what? Because that man's thoughts didn't float off into open air. They went into electrodes, into a decoder, into software with a version number, running on hardware with a power supply, displaying words on a screen that somebody else had to be in the room to read. He didn't leave a body behind. He negotiated a border with a new one. So here's what I'm promising you for the next hour. We are going to take the oldest dream human beings have ever had, that the mind can leave the body, and we are going to walk it through the places where it has actually been tested. Locked-in syndrome. A man who lost his sense of touch from the neck down. Phantom limbs. Language models that can write a sonnet but can't reliably tell you what this and that mean. Human neurons in a dish learning to play Pong. And we are going to come out the other side with something I think is more useful than an answer. We're going to come out with a better question and a way to count. Here's why this matters to you, specifically, sitting wherever you are right now. Every one of us is already outsourcing pieces of our thinking. Your phone remembers the numbers you used to know by heart. Your calendar holds your intentions. Your search history holds your curiosity. If the mind can migrate, then some of yours already has. The question isn't whether it's happening. The question is what it lands in when it goes. I'm Chris. My friends are already on the patio. Lily's got her notebook out, which is never a good sign for our runtime. Charlie's fiddling with a lens cap, and Dr. Vega is wearing the turtleneck because of course he is. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Oldest Human Dream. Before we touch a single study, I want to give the ancient version its due, because it's older and stranger than most people realize, and because it is not stupid. It's the opposite of stupid. It's one of the most persistent ideas our species has ever produced. The Gnostics had a phrase for it, the divine spark, a fragment of something luminous trapped in matter, homesick for a fullness it half remembers. The Platonists had the prisoner in the cave. The Essenes, out by the Dead Sea, had something a little different that I want you to keep in your back pocket for later. Not escape, but rule. An ordered community with a written charter governing who could speak, in what order, and what had to be acknowledged before anything happened. Hold that thought. It's going to come back around in a way you won't expect. What I want you to notice in this chapter is a detail that almost nobody notices. In these old stories, the soul almost never leaves for nowhere. It leaves for somewhere. There's a boat, a ladder, a river, a guide, a realm with rules. Even at its most mystical, the human imagination could not picture a mind with no address. That's not a small observation. That might be the whole episode. Lily's going to open us up on this one. Charlie is going to do what Charlie does and put his boots on the ground. And Dr. Vega is going to remind us that a beautiful idea and a tested idea are two different animals.
Right, so I've been reading Gnostic material for the book for about 4 months now. And there's this image that keeps turning up in different clothes across completely unconnected traditions. The spark. A little bit of light that doesn't belong here, stuck in a body it didn't ask for, trying to remember its way home.
That's a bit bleak, isn't it? Body you didn't ask for?
Well, that's the point, Boar. It's a homesickness myth. And homesickness only makes sense if there's a home.
Which is the interesting part, actually. Not the escape, the destination.
Exactly. That's exactly what I've been chewing on. Because I went looking deliberately for a myth where the soul just goes. No realm, no guide, no river, no ferryman, no gate, no scales, no judgment hall. Just open.
And?
I can't find one. Not a proper one. Every tradition I've looked at gives the departing mind somewhere to arrive, and usually a set of rules for getting in.
Huh. So even the afterlife has a queue.
The afterlife has paperwork, Charlie. The Egyptian version literally weighs your heart against a feather. That's an audit.
Fair.
And the Egyptians didn't just weigh you, they wrote it down. There's a scribe in the scene. Thoth, with a palette. The record matters as much as the verdict.
Okay, that's genuinely a good catch. And I say that as someone contractually obligated to be annoyed by mythology.
Oh, Vega, you say the nicest things.
So the modern version of this is what? Uploading? Getting your brain scanned and copied onto a hard drive somewhere?
Actually, that's exactly the modern version. And it's more or less the same story with worse production design. 1995 gave us a film where Keanu Reeves carried data in his head. 1982 gave us a man digitized into a computer by a laser. 1981 gave us a very good Police album called Ghost in the Machine, which took its title from a philosopher who meant it as an insult.
Wait, an insult?
Gilbert Ryle, 1949. He coined the ghost in the machine to mock the idea that mind and body are two separate substances that somehow shake hands. He thought it was a category error. He was not being flattering, and the phrase has spent 70-odd years being used approvingly by people who never read him.
That is the most philosophy thing I've ever heard.
But here's what I'd push back on, gently. Ryle's mocking the mechanism. He's not mocking the longing. And the longing is data too, in its way. Something in us has wanted out of the body for as long as we've been writing things down.
Sure, and I'd separate 3 words before we go any further, because this whole conversation goes sideways if we don't. Cognition, intelligence, consciousness.
Go on then.
Cognition is the machinery. Perceiving, remembering, categorizing, reasoning, planning. Intelligence is the flexible use of that machinery on problems it hasn't seen before. Consciousness is the hard one. Whether there's anything it's like to be the system. Whether the lights are on inside.
And people mush those together.
People mush those together constantly, including people who should know better, including headlines. You can have a lot of the first 2 and leave the third completely unresolved. That's not a dodge. That's the actual state of play.
Which is why I like the mythic version, actually. It's honest about being a story. Nobody reading the Gnostic material thinks they're reading a lab report.
And that's the line I want to hold all episode. Philosophy is not evidence. It's a very good way of asking. It's not a way of proving.
So where does that leave us? Nice story, no receipts?
It leaves us with a testable version. The mystics asked, can the spark leave? We can ask something narrower and much more answerable. When you take away a bodily channel, motion, touch, feedback, what actually survives? And what does it survive inside of?
Physicists would call that a boundary condition. Psychologists would call it the self-model. Mystics called it the vessel.
And a photojournalist calls it the frame. You can't take a picture from nowhere, mate. There's always a camera position. Even a satellite's got coordinates.
That's annoyingly good.
I have my moments.
You do, you know. You really do.
Cheers. Anyway, so what I want to know is whether anyone's actually tested this, or whether we're all just...
She wasn't talking about the camera, Charlie.
What?
Nothing. Continue.
Right. So has anyone tested it?
Here's something for you lot at home, before we move on. And I do want you to actually answer this one. Think of a myth from wherever you grew up, wherever your family's from, where a soul or a spirit travels somewhere. And tell me, did it arrive somewhere with rules? Was there a gate, a boat, a judge, a river, a price? Or did it just go free? I genuinely want to know if there's one I've missed, and I will read every single one, because that's the kind of thing that keeps a retired teacher up at night.
And here's where this stops being a story about myths and starts being a story about people who are alive right now. Because we do have cases, real ones, where the body went quiet and the mind very clearly did not. Chapter 2, When the Body Goes Quiet. This chapter is the one I want to handle most carefully because we are talking about actual human beings with actual conditions, and I'm not interested in turning anybody's life into a curiosity. So here's how we're going to do it. These are not exhibits, they're witnesses. Every one of these people found out something about the relationship between mind and body that the rest of us can only theorize about, and they found it out the hard way, without volunteering. 4 cases. Locked-in syndrome, where awareness stays and almost all voluntary movement goes. Deafferentation, a man who at 19 lost nearly all touch and position sense below the neck and had to relearn how to move using nothing but his eyes and his attention. Phantom limbs, where the body part is gone and the felt body isn't. And the brain-computer interface work I opened the show with. Here's the pattern I want you to watch for. In every single case, something survives that we didn't expect. And in every single case, it survives by being routed through something else. Nothing here floats. Everything here gets replumbed. Dr. Vega is going to keep us honest on the clinical detail, and he's got a bit of housekeeping to do early on that I want you to actually listen to rather than skip.
Before we start, quick bit of housekeeping. And I'm going to say it once, plainly, and then never again. We are 3 people on a patio. I have a doctorate in astrophysics, which qualifies me to talk about stars and to be irritating at parties. Lily taught school. Charlie takes photographs. None of us is a physician, a neurologist, or a therapist. Nothing in this chapter is medical advice. Nothing here is a diagnosis. And if anything we describe maps onto something happening to you or somebody you love, please talk to an actual clinician and not to a podcast. We're going to describe published findings as carefully as we can. That's the whole of our authority here.
Appreciate you saying it.
Right, locked-in syndrome. Typically a brainstem injury. Severe paralysis, loss of speech, and, this is the part that matters, retained awareness. And in many cases, retained cognitive capacity. Often some eye movement survives, which becomes the entire communication channel.
So the person is in there.
The person is in there. And here's the epistemic gut punch. Every test we normally use to detect a mind is an action test. We ask you to speak, point, press, blink, respond. Close the action channel, and our instruments go quiet. And for a long time, quiet instruments got read as an empty room.
Crikey.
That's the bit that frightens me most, honestly. Not the paralysis, the being misread.
It should frighten you. It's a measurement problem with a person on the other end of it.
All right, but hang on. Doesn't that prove the dualist's right? Mind's clearly separate from body if the body can go completely offline and the mind's still running.
Actually, no. And this is the single most common leap people make. What it proves is that motor output and cognition can come apart. That's it. The patient still has a living brain, a beating heart, a metabolism, a temperature, a sensory system, a history, a family in the room. The organism is fully present. What's broken is the export cable.
Export cable. Okay, that lands.
Then take Ian Waterman, 19 years old. An illness wipes out touch and proprioception from the neck down. Proprioception being the sense that tells you where your arm is without looking at it. Close your eyes right now and touch your nose. The fact that you can do that is proprioception.
And he lost it entirely.
Effectively. Motor commands intact. Feedback gone. He was told he'd never move purposefully again. He relearned it by watching. Every gesture became a visually supervised project. He could think, plan, converse, move deliberately.
So the mind won.
The mind compensated. There's a difference, and it's the whole point. Turn out the lights and he's in trouble. What the body used to do silently and for free, he now has to do consciously and pay for in attention.
Oh, that's a hard one. So the body wasn't a limitation he transcended. It was staff he was doing without.
That is a much better sentence than the one I was about to say, and I resent it.
So the body's not the cage. It's the crew.
There's a documentary about him from the late 90s. The Man Who Lost His Body. I watched it years ago and I've never quite got over it.
And phantom limbs? Because that one I've never understood. My uncle had it after he lost a hand. Said he could feel the fingers curling. Said they'd cramp and he'd catch himself trying to shake them out.
Did it fade?
Not really. Changed shape, he said. Went shorter over the years. Like the hand had crept up the arm toward him.
That's the bit I've read about. They call it telescoping. And what got me when I first came across it is that he isn't remembering the hand. He's receiving it. Which means what you feel as your body was never a live picture of your flesh in the first place. It's a model. Your brain's been drawing it your whole life out of everything you've ever touched and moved. And when the flesh goes, the drawing carries on.
And I'd add exactly one boundary to that, because it's a good enough summary that people will run too far with it. The model is generated by a nervous system with an embodied history. It is not evidence of a limb existing somewhere non-physical. It's evidence that embodiment includes prediction and memory, not just current anatomy.
So you can feel something that isn't there anymore, because the shape it left behind is still being maintained.
Yes.
That's not just limbs, though, is it?
What do you mean?
Nothing. Never mind, my love.
Charlie.
Yeah?
Never mind.
You two are weird today.
And now, the modern case, which is the one Chris opened with. Long-term intracortical brain-computer interface. Nature Medicine this year. A participant with ALS. Implanted electrode arrays in speech-motor cortex. A decoder trained to turn neural activity into text and cursor movement.
And the numbers were the mad bit.
19 months. Over 3,800 hours of use. More than 183,000 sentences, which comes out to close to 2 million words.
2 million words, that's what? 20 novels.
And that's at home? Not in a lab with people watching?
At home. Care partners handled the setup. Roughly 20 minutes. And then he was on his own with it. Messaging, browsing, video calls. He held down employment.
Right, but how much of it came out correct? Because that's the bit that'd matter to me. No good if you're spending half your day fixing what it got wrong.
That is the correct question, and almost nobody asks it. He rated about 92% of his sentences as at least mostly right. In structured testing against a very large vocabulary, word accuracy ran over 99%.
That's a life. That's not a demo, that's a life.
It's a life, and it is emphatically not a mind without a body. Look at what it takes to make one sentence happen. Living cortex, implanted electrodes, a decoder with weights, a computer, power, a screen, a network, and at least one other human being who is willing to read what appears.
So he swapped a body for a bigger, weirder body.
He swapped a route. The agency is his. It always was. But the path from intention to consequence now crosses biology, silicon, software, and other people.
A border, not a doorway.
A border with customs, forms, and a maintenance schedule.
And I'll tell you what's not in any of those stories. Nobody in any of those stories is free of something breaking. Battery dies, decoder drifts, someone's got to be there at 8 in the morning to help you put it on. That's not liberation. That's a different dependency.
Which, I want to flag this. Mainstream neuroscience doesn't frame it this way. They'd say assistive technology and leave it there. But here's a thought experiment. Line up every case we just described on a single axis. Typical body, locked in, deafferented, brain-computer interface. And then keep going. Persistent digital agent, neurons in a dish. What you get is not a switch between embodied and disembodied. You get a slider. And what slides is where the constraints live.
And that slider is going to become the spine of this whole episode. But before we can talk about where constraints go, we have to talk about what they were doing in the first place. Because the body was never just a container. The body was running a process the whole time, quietly, for free, and mostly without telling you. Chapter 3. What the body was doing all along. I want to make a confession that I think a lot of programmers will recognize. For most of my career, I thought of the body the way I thought of a keyboard. Input device. Necessary, replaceable, not particularly interesting. The interesting stuff happened in the processor. That was wrong, and the thing that changed my mind wasn't philosophy, it was a mapping study. Last year, researchers used 7 Tesla functional MRI, very high resolution, to map what's called the allostatic interoceptive system in the human brain. Interoception is your brain's model of your insides: heartbeat, breath, gut, temperature, energy, fatigue. Allostasis is the anticipating part, not waiting for you to run out of fuel, but predicting the bill before it arrives. And what they found was not a little module tucked in a corner. It was a distributed, whole brain system, with functional evidence lining up with more than 96% of connections previously documented in anatomical tracing work. That's the finding that broke my keyboard metaphor. Your brain is not a processor that occasionally receives body reports. Your brain is, substantially, a control system for a body that happens to also do algebra. And that reframes everything about what disembodied would even mean. Because if you removed all of that, hunger, fatigue, ache, breath, the low hum of maintaining yourself, You might not get the same mind with fewer distractions. You might get something cognitively capable and motivationally unrecognizable. The anchor for this chapter isn't quantum anything. It's information theory. The body is compression.
So, interoception. Your brain maintains a continuously updated model of your internal state. And critically, it doesn't wait for signals. It predicts them. It's guessing what you're about to need and preloading the response.
Like getting the kettle on before anyone asks.
Astonishingly, yes. That's allostasis. Stability through anticipation rather than reaction.
And that's running all the time, under everything.
Under everything. The 7 Tesla mapping work put a very fine resolution on it. Cortical and subcortical, insula, cingulate, brainstem nuclei, hypothalamus, the monoamine centers. It's not a subsystem. It's woven through the regions we associate with emotion, decision-making, salience, and attention.
So when people say, trust your gut, they're not being completely daft.
They're being imprecise rather than daft. Some researchers speculate that a fair amount of what we call feeling is inference about bodily state. That's a live research program, not a settled result. And I want to be careful there.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because that's not a new idea at all. It's just newly instrumented. Every tradition I've read locates something in the body. The Hebrew scriptures put compassion in the bowels. Chinese medicine maps emotions onto organs. Everybody knew grief sits in the chest.
Neuroscience calls it interoceptive inference. Psychology calls it embodied affect. Mystics called it the seat of the soul.
And my nan called it indigestion.
Your nan sounds like she'd have got on well with Dr. Vega.
I would have adored her.
All right, but where's this going? Because right now it sounds like bodies do stuff, which, mate, yes.
Here's where it's going. The body isn't just doing stuff. The body is doing compression.
Explain that one to a bloke who shoots film.
Happily. Think about how much information is hitting you right now. The full electromagnetic spectrum. Every pressure wave in the air. Every chemical in reach. It's effectively infinite. And you experience almost none of it.
Because my eyes only do a narrow band.
Your eyes only do a narrow band. Your ears cut off at both ends.
And your hands, surely. I can only hold certain shapes, which means only certain things in this world are even candidates for picking up.
Correct. And that one's badly underrated. Your morphology quietly decides what counts as an object.
Pain's in there too. Nobody asks my permission when I stub my toe. Straight to the front of the queue, no discussion.
And tiredness. Tiredness decides how long any plan of mine is allowed to be.
And your vestibular system silently establishes which way is up, so that you have never once in your life had to compute it.
So by the time I'm actually thinking about something,
The field has already been cut down by orders of magnitude, and you didn't do any of that work. The body pre-filtered reality before deliberation ever started. That's not a limitation on cognition. That's a subsidy to it.
Huh. So it's a lossy codec.
It is precisely a lossy codec, and I'm irritated I didn't say it first.
See, when you shoot digital, you can capture way more dynamic range than you can print. So you've got to throw stuff away on purpose. And the choices you make about what to throw away, that is the photograph. The picture isn't what you captured, it's what you discarded.
oh, that's lovely. That's going in my book, if you don't mind.
Have at it.
I'll credit you.
No need.
I'd like to.
Someone's going to have to explain to this man what's happening eventually, and I've decided it isn't going to be me.
What isn't going to be you?
Exhibit A, ladies and gentlemen.
Leave him alone. Right, here's the bit that unsettles me. If the body is doing all this filtering and doing all this predicting, and it's tangled up with what we call feeling and wanting and caring, then what happens to a mind that doesn't have any of that? Not a damaged version, just none of it. No hunger, no tiredness, no ache, no breath.
That is exactly the right question. And the honest answer is that we don't know. And the tempting answer is wrong.
What's the tempting answer?
That you get you, but improved. Same person, fewer interruptions. Finally able to concentrate.
And you don't buy it.
I don't buy it. And here's why. Hunger isn't an interruption to your thinking. Hunger is one of the things that makes some outcomes matter more than others. Take away every signal that says, This costs you something. And you don't get a purer thinker. You get a system with no reason to prefer anything.
A mind with nothing at stake.
A mind with nothing at stake.
That's actually properly eerie.
It's the Gnostic thing inverted, isn't it? They thought the flesh was the prison, and the spark was the prisoner. But if Vega's right, some of what we'd call the self is made out of the prison walls.
Careful. I'd say some of what we call motivation. I'm not making a claim about selfhood because nobody can cash that check yet.
Noted, Professor.
Question for everyone listening, and I want honest answers. When was the last time your body made a decision before you did? Not a big one, small. You stood up because you were restless. You went quiet because you were tired. You said yes because you were hungry and the meeting was going long. Tell us. I reckon the comments on this one are going to be better than the episode.
So the body compresses, predicts, and supplies the stakes, which raises the obvious problem, because right now all over the world there are systems doing things we used to call thinking, and they don't have any of that. No gut, no fatigue, no ache, no reason to prefer. So what exactly are they standing on? Chapter 4, The Machine That Seems Bodiless. Okay, this is the chapter where I have to be most disciplined, because this is my professional home turf, and it's also where the loudest overclaiming happens in both directions. Direction 1. These systems are basically people and consciousness is immanent. Direction 2. These systems are nothing, they're autocomplete with a marketing budget. I don't think either of those survives contact with the actual evidence, so we're going to do something narrower and more interesting. We're going to ask what a language model is standing on. 3 pieces of evidence in this chapter, and I chose them because they cut in different directions. First, the case for, these systems demonstrably do things that used to require a human body's worth of experience. That's real. It's not nothing. It genuinely undermines the strongest version of, you must have hands to think. Second, the case against. A study out this year used spatial demonstratives, the words this and that, as a probe. 6,400 responses from 320 native speakers, English and Chinese, compared against 5 leading models. The humans showed distinct language-specific patterns, and, as you'll hear, a real trade-off between them, where each language buys something and pays for it somewhere else. The models showed neither side of that trade, and no cultural difference at all. Think about how small that is. 2 of the shortest words in the language, and they turn out to have a body hidden inside them. Third, the strangest one, neurons in a dish, learning to play Pong. Metaphorical anchor for this chapter is information theory, reality as code. And a very old question in a very new outfit. Can you learn what the world means from a description of it?
Right, I'm going to be the one who asks the daft question because someone has to, and I've got tenure in daft questions.
You're retired.
Emeritus in daft questions. When one of these language models writes something that moves me, and one did actually, a poem about a lighthouse, don't laugh. Is anything happening?
Something is happening. Nobody has established what, and anyone telling you otherwise on either side is selling something.
That's not much of an answer.
It's the accurate one. Let me give you what we can actually stand on. These systems learn grammar and semantic structure, translate, summarize, write code, do multi-step reasoning across a lot of tasks, and plan when scaffolded. And they do it with no childhood, no hands, no hunger, no fear of falling down the stairs.
Which is remarkable.
Which is evidence. Specifically, it's evidence against the strongest claim in embodied cognition. The claim that you cannot get useful cognitive capability without a human-style sensory motor life. That claim is in trouble.
So the ghost's out of the machine after all.
Actually, and this is my favorite actually of the entire episode, the ghost is made of machines. Plural. Where do you think the training data came from?
People writing things.
Embodied people writing things. Every sentence about cold, weight, distance, exhaustion, longing, the smell of rain on hot pavement, all of it produced by creatures with bodies, describing what having a body was like. The model has no body of its own. It is saturated in the residue of billions of them.
Oh, that's beautiful and horrible.
It's a second-hand embodiment, like learning to swim from an extremely large number of letters written by swimmers.
And you'd get quite good at talking about swimming.
You'd get remarkably good at talking about swimming. Which brings me to the demonstratives.
This is the this and that study.
This is the this and that study. And I love it because it's such a small hinge for such a big door. 6,400 responses, 320 native speakers, English and Chinese, 5 leading models.
Hang on, why is that hard? This is close. That is far. Done.
Close to whom? You're holding a cup. I'm across the table. Is it this cup or that cup? Depends who's speaking. Depends what we can both see. Depends whether I'm gesturing. Depends on the conventions of the language we're speaking. Those 2 tiny words are carrying a geometry of bodies in a room.
And what came back when they measured it?
Better than I expected, actually. It wasn't one language does this properly and the other doesn't. It was a trade-off. English speakers were reliable on near versus far, solid on the distance judgment. But they struggled to take somebody else's position, to work out what that one means from where you're standing. Chinese speakers switched perspective fluently, moved between viewpoints without effort, and in exchange, tolerated a good deal more ambiguity about distance.
So each one's good at the thing the other's rubbish at.
Each one bought something and paid for it somewhere else, which is exactly what a lived convention looks like. You can't have all of it, so a culture picks. And the models landed on neither side. They missed the near-far contrast, and this is the part that actually stopped me. They showed no cultural difference at all. Same reasoning, whichever language they were working in.
So they didn't pick a trade-off. They didn't know there was one to make.
They didn't know there was a choice on the table.
So they know the definition and they've never been in the room.
That's the cleanest summary of the finding I've heard, and I'm stealing it.
Okay, but that's fixable, surely. Bolt a camera on, give it arms.
Partly. There's work on exactly that, mapping a language model into a humanoid robot, so linguistic abstraction turns into physical motion. And it does pick things up that text alone doesn't give it. But a perspective this year drew a distinction I think is underrated. External embodiment versus internal embodiment.
Meaning?
External embodiment is cameras, arms, contact with the world. Internal embodiment is modeled drives, internal states, self-maintenance, the machine equivalent of hunger and fatigue and damage. And current systems are getting stronger on the first and are largely missing the second.
So you can give it a body without giving it any stakes.
You can give it a body without giving it any stakes. A robot can learn that a mug is fragile. That's very different from having anything at risk when it breaks.
Right, and now do the neurons in the dish, because I've been waiting for this the whole show.
This is the one Anne sent Chris, isn't it? She's been on about it for weeks.
2022. Cultured neurons, human stem cell derived in rodent, grown on a high-density electrode array. The array reads activity and writes structured information back in, and it's hooked into a simplified, Pong-like environment. Ball position goes in as electrical stimulation. Neural activity moves the paddle.
Neurons in a dish, playing Pong.
Playing a Pong-like task. And the cultures showed adaptive changes in behavior under that feedback.
There's something almost tender about it. 1972, that game. 2 lines and a dot. And here it is again, 50-odd years on, being used to ask whether a lump of cells can learn.
My whole childhood was 2 lines and a dot.
The paper's title used the word sentience. I want to be extremely clear that the responsible reading is much narrower. What's securely established is adaptive neural behavior under structured, closed-loop feedback. Consciousness is not established. It is not even approached. And the organoid field that grew out of this has, to its credit, been raising the ethics before the capability arrives rather than after.
But here's what gets me. You said disembodied neurons. That's how it got written up. But that dish has got a body.
Say more.
Well, the electrodes are its sensors. The game's its world. The paddle's its hand. The timing of the feedback is its consequences. And there's a machine keeping the temperature and the nutrients right, which is basically its metabolism, run by a technician.
Charlie, that is the thesis of the entire episode, and you just built it out of a dish.
Did I?
You did, my love. You do that more than you know.
Cheers?
He said, cheers. She handed him her heart on a plate, and he said, cheers. I want that on my headstone.
Right, question for you at home, and be honest with yourselves. If a system can talk about grief and cold and losing someone entirely from other people's descriptions and never from its own, is that understanding? Is that a very good echo? Or is there a third thing we haven't got a word for yet? Because I lean toward the third thing and I can't defend it. And I'd like someone to help me.
Which means we now have everything we need for the last chapter. Because if the dish has a body, and the language model has a body made of other people's bodies, and the brain-computer interface user has a body made of cortex and software, then maybe the word disembodied has been doing bad work this entire time. And I want to give you something better to replace it with. Chapter 5. Return through the affective body. All right. This is where I stop being the host and put on the other hat, and I want to be upfront about the conflict of interest because that's how we do things here. What I'm about to describe is my own framework, the Eden hypothesis, and a piece of software architecture I built called the ASI backbone. Neither of them is settled science. Neither has been experimentally confirmed by anything we've discussed today. The Eden hypothesis is a lens for thinking, published as a monograph, and I hold it exactly as loosely as that description implies. The backbone is a governance spine for software. It's a real thing with a real repository and a license, and it makes no claim to be an intelligence, a mind, or anything remotely like one. So take what follows as a proposal, not a conclusion. The proposal is a phrase, the affective body, not a body in the meat sense. The minimum integrated system that gives something a boundary, a way in, a way out, a memory, a maintenance cost, something it values, feedback from the consequences of what it does, and a world where some things are possible and some things aren't. 6 components: inputs, outputs, homeostasis, memory, valuation, governance. And once you have that vocabulary, disembodiment stops looking like escape and starts looking like something else entirely. It starts looking like migration. Also, Dr. Vega is going to give you one concrete, measurable test in this chapter. Not a metaphor, a number you could actually go collect. I'd ask you to hold me to it.
Okay, affective body. 6 slots. Inputs, outputs, self-maintenance, memory, valuation, governance. Let's run the cases through it, because that's the only way to know if a definition is doing any work.
Typical human first.
Rich in all 6. Senses, limbs, metabolism, autobiography, appetites, and a social world that tells you what you're allowed to do.
Locked in.
Inputs largely intact. Outputs catastrophically narrowed. Everything else present. Which is precisely why the mind persists and why we nearly missed it.
Brain-computer interface user.
Outputs restored through a hybrid channel. Maintenance now includes a battery, a calibration schedule, and a care partner. Governance now includes a research protocol and a device manufacturer.
Language model.
Narrow inputs, narrow outputs. Self-maintenance handled entirely by external infrastructure. Memory episodic and fragile. Valuation assigned by somebody else. And governance, very strong governance, imposed from outside.
Neurons in the dish.
Electrodes, paddle, nutrient system, game world, and a lab schedule. All 6, jury-rigged, in a plastic dish.
So none of them is bodiless.
None of them is bodiless. Which is why I've come around to Chris's framing, and I do not come around to things easily. The word we want isn't disembodiment, it's constraint migration.
Meaning the rules don't disappear, they change address.
They change address. Muscles become actuators. Skin becomes sensors. Proprioception becomes capability telemetry. The systems report on what it can currently do. Metabolism becomes a compute and power budget. Pain becomes an error signal and a circuit breaker. And social identity, reputation, standing, being known becomes credentials and an audit history.
That last one gave me a chill.
It should. It's the most human item on the list, and it's the one that translates most cleanly.
All right, so where does the Eden thing come in? And no jargon, I mean it.
Let me try, since it's my job to translate this man's work into English.
Please.
The starting idea is a garden before anything's been decided. Everything's still possible. Nothing's been picked. And what Chris calls collapse is just possibility narrowing into one actual thing. That's it. That's the whole seed.
Like choosing.
Like choosing, but bigger than choosing. And the revision he made this year is the bit I find genuinely interesting. The original version had that narrowing driven by time. The revision says no, it's driven by structure. Possibility doesn't collapse into just anything. It collapses into whatever the active structure permits.
Which is a modest-sounding sentence with sharp edges. Because if that's right, then removing a body doesn't return you to the garden.
No, it hands you a different structure.
And possibly a narrower one. A text model has no touch, no gravity, no hunger, no local point of view. An agent acts only through the tools it's been granted. A hypothetical uploaded mind would inherit the coordinate system of its simulation, the memory format, the update schedule, the backup policy, and whoever owns the server.
So you don't get freedom. You get a different landlord.
You get a different landlord. Chris calls it recollapse into architecture, which is bleaker phrasing than I'd use, but I can't fault it.
And here's where it goes round to where we started. And I've been waiting all episode for this. The Gnostics said the spark was trapped in matter, but they also said the trap was built. Archons, rulers, structures with rules, made deliberately.
Go on.
Well, if you swap a biological structure for a designed one, you haven't escaped the Archons. You've just met a different set. And these ones have documentation.
Okay, that's the best thing anyone has said on this patio in a year.
What about the Essenes? Chris flagged them at the top and then just left it hanging.
Ah, now that's the good one. Because they weren't primarily an escape people. They were a rule people. Out by the Dead Sea, with a written community charter. Who speaks first? In what order? What has to be acknowledged before an action is taken? What gets recorded? Their whole spiritual technology was a governance document.
Which maps onto the software half of this uncomfortably well.
Doesn't it just?
Chris's backbone, and I've actually read the repository, which I'm told is unusual behavior, is a governance layer for consequential software actions. Before something irreversible happens, you capture the intent, evaluate it against a policy with a version number, record the decision, require an acknowledgement where the stakes justify one, write a durable receipt, and grant only scoped follow-on authority. An execution stays the host's responsibility.
That's just having a process.
It is emphatically just having a process. That's what makes it defensible. Notice what he's not claiming. He's not claiming it thinks. He's not claiming it's conscious. He's not claiming it enforces anything by itself. It's a spine, not a brain.
But look at what the spine's made of, though. Health telemetry, which is interoception. A capability registry, which is proprioception. Knowing where your own limbs are and what they can reach. Risk signals and circuit breakers, which are pain. Authentication, which is an immune boundary. Audit receipts, which are episodic memory. And a handshake before a consequential act, which is...
hesitation.
Inhibition. The gap between the impulse and the movement.
Which every organism has, and which almost no software has.
So the argument is that the first body an artificial system needs isn't arms. It's a rule book.
The argument is that governance may be the first synthetic anatomy. And these are structural analogies. I want that on the record. Telemetry does not feel like hunger. A circuit breaker does not feel like pain. Nobody here is claiming otherwise.
And now the test, because you promised.
And now, the test. Here's one crisp, measurable proxy, and it requires no philosophy whatsoever. Tool-using software agents fail constantly in a specific way. They assume a file exists that doesn't. They assume they have a permission they don't. They act as though a step completed when it didn't. That's not a reasoning failure. That is a proprioception failure. The system does not have an accurate model of its own current capabilities. So, give an agent an authoritative, continuously updated registry of what it can actually do right now. Available tools, live permissions, current environment state, resource limits, which operations are reversible, and then measure one number, the invalid action rate. What percentage of attempted actions fail because the agent misjudged its own body? If synthetic proprioception is doing real work, that number drops measurably against a matched baseline. If it doesn't drop, the analogy is decorative and should be abandoned.
And that's it? That's the whole test?
That's the whole test. It's small, it's boring, and it's falsifiable, which is the highest compliment I can pay an idea. It would not confirm the Eden hypothesis. It would not tell you anything about consciousness. It would tell you one narrow thing: whether knowing your own body reduces the number of times you reach for something that isn't there.
Which is a very good description of growing up, actually.
It's a very good description of Monday.
Can I say the thing I've been circling all episode?
I've been waiting.
We started with people wanting to get out. Out of the flesh, out of the ache, out of the limit. And every single thing we've looked at today says the same thing back. You don't get out. You get reassigned. The man with the implant didn't leave his body. He took on a bigger and more fragile one. The neurons didn't escape into abstraction. They got a paddle. The model doesn't float above human experience. It's made of the sediment of it.
So, the dream's dead.
No. The dream changes shape. And I think it changes into something kinder, honestly. Because if there's no such thing as a mind without a body, then there's no such thing as a mind on its own. Every mind is in relationship with something that holds it, feeds it, limits it, and gives it something to lose.
That's the loveliest way anyone's ever described being stuck.
I'm not describing being stuck, Charlie. I'm describing being held.
Right, yeah. I moved the chairs, by the way, earlier, before we started. They were too far apart and I couldn't hear you properly over the wind, so I dragged mine round.
I noticed.
Just makes it easier.
It does. It really does.
I'm going to allow it.
Allow what?
Nothing, Charlie. Nothing at all. And for the record, this chair I'm sitting in is also an effective body. Somebody shaped it to tell my spine where to go, which direction to face, and that I belong in this circle. This conversation has never once been bodiless. It's distributed across 3 chairs, some microphones, a lot of cabling, and every nervous system currently listening to it.
Including yours out there. You're part of the loop.
And that's the note I want to end on. Let me pull it all together. So, let's count what we've got. We opened with the oldest dream we have, the spark that wants out of the flesh, and Lily found the thing hiding in plain sight inside all of those stories. The soul never leaves for nowhere. There's always a boat, a gate, a judge, a set of rules. Even our wildest imagining of freedom came with an address. Chapter 2. We sat with people who've lived closest to the question. Locked-in syndrome showed us that our tests for mind are action tests, and that a quiet instrument is not an empty room. Waterman showed us that cognition can compensate for a lost bodily channel, but it pays for it in attention forever. Phantom Limbs showed us the felt body is a model, generated centrally, that can outlive the flesh it was built from. And a man with ALS showed us what 19 months, 3,800 hours, and 183,000 sentences look like when intention is rerouted through cortex, electrodes, software, and another human being willing to read the screen. Chapter 3. We found out what the body had been doing the whole time, predicting your needs before you have them, compressing an infinite world down to something a mind can hold, and, this is the one that stays with me, supplying the stakes. A system with no cost has no reason to prefer anything. Chapter 4. We looked at the machines that seem bodiless and found bodies everywhere. A language model with no childhood, standing on the linguistic residue of billions of embodied lives. 2 tiny words, this and that, carrying a whole geometry of people in a room, and models that know the definition without ever having been in the room, and neurons in a dish that turned out to have senses, a world, a hand, consequences, and a metabolism, all of it built out of lab equipment. And Chapter 5, we swapped one word for another, not disembodiment, constraint migration, muscles to actuators, skin to sensors, metabolism to a compute budget, pain to an error signal, and reputation, being known, being accountable to people who remember what you did, to credentials and an audit trail, which brought us to the strangest conclusion I've arrived at in a while, and I want to say it plainly and without overselling it. If you were building an artificial mind, the first body it might need isn't arms, it's a rule book. Identity, capabilities, limits, a record, and a moment of hesitation before it does something it can't take back. The Essenes, out in the desert a little over 2,000 years ago, wrote a community rule that did exactly that for human beings. Who speaks? In what order? What must be acknowledged before an action? What gets written down? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's the same problem, wearing very different clothes. And Dr. Vega left you one concrete thing to hold me to. Give a software agent an honest, live model of its own capabilities. Measure the invalid action rate against a matched baseline. If synthetic proprioception is real work, that number moves. If it doesn't, the whole analogy is decoration, and I should drop it. That's the deal. I want to be clear about what today was and wasn't. Nothing we discussed proves the Eden hypothesis. Nothing we discussed proves a mind can exist without matter, and nothing we discussed proves it can't. There is no accepted evidence for consciousness without a physical substrate. The models are impressive and unresolved. The neurons in the dish adapted, and that's all we can honestly say they did. My framework remains a lens. Lenses are for looking through. They are not the view. But here's the question I'm walking away with, and I'd like you to walk away with it too. Not, can a mind be disembodied? But, what is the smallest body a mind needs to stay grounded, coherent, adaptable, and responsible? Because that one's answerable. In pieces, slowly, with actual measurements. The mind may not be a prisoner of the body, but it isn't a guest with no forwarding address either. Every mind we know of has a body. We've just been bad at counting them. Thank you for spending this hour on the patio with us. If this gave you something to turn over, hit like, and share it with somebody who'd argue with you about it. Those are the best conversations. Lily wants your travel myths. Charlie wants to know when your body decided something before you did. And I want to know what you think the smallest possible body is. Take care of the one you've got. We'll see you next time.